They thought the war would grind on for years. Fortress, alliances, trenches. Those were the anchors of strategy. But in May 1940, the sky cracked open over France, and the world discovered that war could move at the speed of sound. In just 6 weeks, Germany dismantled the armies of France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. It was one of the swiftest military victories in modern history. Yet amid the tales of Blitzkrieg tanks and lightning infantry, one force carved its name into the skies. The Luftwaffe. How did Germany's young and untested air force so utterly dominate its foes? And how could a campaign that seemed so brilliant, so overwhelming, already contain the seeds of future failure? This is the story of the Luftwaffe's moment of triumph, the silent fractures beneath its wings. The year was 1940. Nazi Germany had spent the previous months expanding its reach with breathtaking speed. Poland had fallen in 5 weeks, Denmark in 1 day, Norway in 2 months. Hitler's war machine appeared unstoppable. But the true test still lay ahead. France. For Germany, France was not just an enemy, it was a specter of humiliation. The trauma of the First World War still lingered. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles in 1919, had dismantled Germany's pride, crippled its military, and sought to contain it forever. Now, Hitler aimed to reverse that verdict in the most dramatic way imaginable. The plan was bold and dangerously unconventional. Army Group B would attack Belgium and the Netherlands. Drawing Allied forces forward, it was a feint. The real blow would come through the Ardennes forest, a region the Allies believed was too rugged for tanks. Yet through this narrow corridor, Army Group A, led by the German panzer divisions, would burst into France's rear. But to succeed, this plan needed a second weapon. The skies. Enter the Luftwaffe, the aerial spearhead of the Reich. By May 1940, the Luftwaffe had amassed nearly 4,000 operational aircraft, including dive bombers, tactical bombers, fighters, and reconnaissance planes. It was an air force built not for strategic bombing of cities, but for battlefield supremacy, for clearing the skies, paralyzing enemy movement, and paving the way for Germany's army on the ground. Unlike the Allies, who dispersed their air power across a broad front and tied it tightly to ground commands, the Germans concentrated their aircraft where the battle mattered most. They had learned the lessons of maneuver warfare, that the modern battlefield is not just a line, but a network, and if you can sever the network, the army collapses. The Luftwaffe's doctrine was shaped around 3 pillars. First, gain air superiority. Second, strike key operational targets, such as communication nodes, airfields, and supply lines. Third, to support the Wehrmacht, but only when such cooperation would decisively end the battle. Contrary to popular belief, the Luftwaffe was not merely a close air support arm. Its design was surgical, almost philosophical strike, where it counts, not where it's seen. And on May 10, 1940, it was time to test that philosophy. As German ground forces pushed through the Ardennes, the Luftwaffe was already at work. 3,500 aircraft unleashed strikes against Dutch and Belgian airfields, destroying dozens of planes before they even took off. Within days, the Dutch Air Force ceased to exist as an operational force, but the true test was still ahead. The River Meuse. The Meuse was not just a river, it was a barrier. If the Germans could not cross it quickly, the Allied forces would regroup and strike back. If they did cross, they could race to the Channel coast, encircle the bulk of the Allied armies in Belgium, and decide the fate of France in a matter of days. It was here that the Luftwaffe's full weight was brought to bear. The Stuka's Germany's infamous dive bombers screamed from the skies, targeting bunkers and fortified positions along the river. Their psychological effect was profound. Even when their bombs missed, the sheer terror they inspired broke morale. Yet, from a tactical standpoint, they had limitations. Destroying a small reinforced bunker from the air was still immensely difficult, even with a direct hit. What turned the tide wasn't just the Stuka, it was the massive coordination of bomber aircraft at the operational level targeting communication hubs, roadways, and troop concentrations behind the front lines. While the Stukas flew 500 sorties, the bombers flew 6 to 8 times that number, sowing confusion and paralysis behind French lines. Every attempt to coordinate a counterattack met with chaos. Roads were cratered, orders failed to arrive, and columns were ambushed from the air. By May 14, German forces had made multiple crossings of the Meuse, but they were vulnerable. French armored units were nearby and could launch a devastating counterattack. They never came. Thanks to the Luftwaffe, French command structures were disoriented, orders were lost, delayed, or never given. What should have been the moment of Allied resistance became a rout, and in the air, the Germans repeated the same strategy. As British and French bombers scrambled to hit the bridges and slow the German advance, they were met with devastating resistance. German fighters swarmed the skies, supported by flak batteries stationed along the riverbanks. Over the course of 3 days, Allied bomber losses, mounted in confidence, faltered. The battlefield had been sealed both on the ground and in the air. By May 17, the breakthrough was complete. The German panzers were on the move, racing west toward the Channel, and the skies above them belonged entirely to the Luftwaffe. Close your eyes. Imagine being a French infantryman near the Meuse in mid-May. Orders are late, the roads are bombed, the sky above is screaming. Even before the enemy appears, you know, something is terribly wrong, and no one is coming to fix it. As German armored columns tore through northern France, the Allied command realized their armies had been caught in a vice. The plan to hold Belgium and the Netherlands had crumbled, and the British Expeditionary Force, along with the best of the French army, was being pushed inexorably toward the Channel. By May 21, German tanks had reached the coast. A pocket had formed. The Allied troops were trapped. From the German perspective, this should have been the end. Encircled, disoriented, and without resupply, the Allies seemed doomed to capture or annihilation. But then, something inexplicable happened. The Germans stopped. Hitler, advised by his high command and wary of overextending his armor, ordered a temporary halt to the advance. His generals feared the marshy terrain near the coast and were concerned about a possible counterattack from the south. It was a moment of caution in an otherwise bold campaign. That pause gave the Allies time to act. They chose to evacuate. The port city of Dunkirk became the focus of a desperate operation to extract as many soldiers as possible. Beginning on May 26, a fleet of military vessels and civilian boats crossed the English Channel under constant threat, hoping to pull off a miracle. The German army had paused, so now it was up to the Luftwaffe to finish the job. And here, cracks began to show in Germany's air strategy. The Luftwaffe had been flying non-stop sorties for over 2 weeks. Aircraft were worn, crews were exhausted. Units were being pulled in multiple directions, supporting ground offensives, attacking French positions, and now being asked to decimate a massive evacuation effort on the coast. On paper, it seemed simple. The Luftwaffe had air superiority. The British and French forces were exposed on beaches, ships clustered at piers and jetties, and yet, for all its might, the Luftwaffe failed to stop the evacuation. Why? Several reasons converged. First, overextension. The Luftwaffe had no single priority. It was asked to harass the retreating French, attack Dunkirk, preserve its forces for the coming Battle of Britain, and reconstitute units that had suffered heavy attrition. No Air Force, not even Germany's, could perform all these missions at once with peak effectiveness. Second, logistical fatigue. Aircraft needed repairs, pilots needed rest, ground crews were overstretched. The high operational tempo that had enabled the rapid conquest now became an anchor. Third, weather and geography, low clouds, smoke from burning fuel, and narrow bombing windows made precision strikes difficult. The beaches at Dunkirk offered little in terms of concentrated target troops were dispersed across wide open areas, making mass bombing less effective. Fourth, resistance. British Hurricane fighters flew covering missions, and Allied anti-aircraft fire from ships and ground batteries took a steady toll. By June, over 338,000 Allied troops had been evacuated from Dunkirk. The miracle had happened. The Luftwaffe inflicted losses. Yes, but not enough. The British Army survived to fight another day, and in that survival lay the seeds of future resistance. Still, for now, Germany looked unstoppable. As German troops moved south, the Luftwaffe turned to its next task, destroying the last vestiges of the French Air Force. On June 3, they launched Operation Polar, massive air raid intended to cripple French air capabilities once and for all. Over 1,000 aircraft were involved, making it one of the largest Luftwaffe missions to date. But unlike earlier strikes, this one did not achieve surprise. French intelligence had gotten wind of the operation. Many aircraft were dispersed. Some were even evacuated. The Luftwaffe struck airfields and infrastructure, but the blow was not decisive. This pattern had been seen before in Poland, and it would soon be seen again in Britain. The idea of a single knockout strike to eliminate an enemy air force proved elusive. Instead, what was needed was sustained pressure attacks in the air, on the ground, across the supply lines, and over time. This was something the Luftwaffe, designed for short, sharp campaigns, was not built to do. By early June, French resistance was collapsing. The Luftwaffe had control of the skies, yet the French Air Force, battered but not broken, was still flying. Some aircraft were evacuated to North Africa, where they would play roles in later colonial and Allied campaigns. Still, the end was near. On June 10, Italy joined the war, attacking France from the southeast. On June 14, German troops entered Paris without a fight. And on the 22nd of June, 1940, the French government surrendered. In 6 weeks, Germany had conquered most of Western Europe, and the Luftwaffe had been instrumental in that victory. But as the smoke cleared over France, a darker question loomed. Could the same tactics be used again, or had Germany's Air Force just burned through its strength in a single campaign? The fall of France in June 1940 sent shockwaves through the world. The German military had just dismantled one of the most powerful armies in Europe, and it had done so in record time. Blitzkrieg became the buzzword, and the Luftwaffe screaming across the skies in sleek, gray formations became the symbol of Germany's new military might. Yet beneath the awe and terror lay a quieter truth. For all its power and precision, the Luftwaffe's performance in France revealed as much about its weaknesses as it did its strengths. Let's begin with what went right. Air superiority was achieved quickly and decisively. By coordinating massive attacks against enemy airfields in the opening days of the campaign, the Luftwaffe robbed the French and Dutch air forces of their ability to respond. The Royal Air Force committed early to Belgium, suffered losses, and was soon withdrawn to preserve strength for Britain's defense. The operational doctrine of the Luftwaffe worked exactly as intended. Instead of attempting massive strategic bombing or acting as an airborne artillery arm, it focused on isolating the battlefield. Airfields, rail yards, communication centers, bridges, these became the preferred targets. The result was paralysis. Armies without orders, supplies, or reinforcements can't fight. No matter how brave the soldiers are, the organizational structure also played a role. The Luftwaffe didn't simply act as a tool of high-commanded created Fliegerkorps, semi-autonomous air corps units tailored to support the most important thrusts of the army. These were not general-purpose units, but specialized weapons fused into the spearhead of the offensive. It was flexible, fast, and devastating. And yet, the cracks were already forming. First and foremost was the problem of attrition. In 6 weeks of combat, the Luftwaffe lost approximately 1,100 aircraft in combat, with additional losses from accidents and mechanical failure pushing that number even higher. Out of a starting force of roughly 4,000, this meant the Luftwaffe had lost over 30% of its operational strength. More than machines, it was the loss of trained aircrew that proved costly. Germany did not have the pilot training, infrastructure, or industrial output to rapidly replace experienced crews. By the time the Luftwaffe turned toward Britain in July 1940, it was a bruised and weary force, not the invincible armada it had once seemed. Second, the Luftwaffe was ill-prepared for prolonged campaigns. Its logistics were tailored for rapid operation-shy sortie rates over short distances, with nearby support. But as German forces advanced, airfields had to be hastily set up on captured ground, supply lines stretched thin, and maintenance suffered. The intensity of effort in France could not be sustained indefinitely. Third, there was a growing misperception among both German leadership and the public that the Luftwaffe was capable of independent victory. The success of air power in France created an illusion that airstrikes alone could win wars. This belief would be tested and ultimately shattered in the skies over Britain and later in the Soviet Union. Fourth, the Luftwaffe's failure at Dunkirk was more than a missed opportunity. It was a strategic misjudgment. The idea that the Air Force could prevent an evacuation of hundreds of thousands of soldiers without the full support of the army ignored the limits of air power. Ships could be sunk and men could be bombed, but without sealing the beaches and harbors with infantry, total success was out of reach. Finally, the Luftwaffe lacked a true strategic bombing arm. While Germany would later attempt long-range bombing over Britain and the Soviet Union, it never had the four-engine bombers or doctrinal focus to conduct deep, sustained campaigns against industrial targets. The Luftwaffe was brilliant in the theater of operational warfare, but it could not touch the enemy's factories, fuel supplies, or morale over the long term. The brilliance of the Luftwaffe in France was like a lightning strike, blinding, fast, and powerful. But what happens after the flash? What if the storm drags on? These questions would define the next phase of the war. As Hitler's armies paraded through Paris and flags bearing swastikas unfurled from government buildings, the German public believed they had witnessed the culmination of military genius. But the victory in France had an unintended consequence. It convinced Germany's leaders that the formula was flawless. The Luftwaffe had, in fact, done exactly what it was designed to do, but it had not been designed for attritional warfare, long-distance logistics, or global air dominance. It had not been designed for the Soviet steppe, the deserts of North Africa, or the skies over London. And yet, this was where the war would go. Blitzkrieg, supported by operational level air power, only worked when the army could break through. But what would happen if it couldn't? The answer would come in 1941, when German forces stalled outside Moscow, and again in 1943 over Stalingrad, and once more in 1944 when Allied bombers darkened the skies over German cities with a reach the Luftwaffe could not match. And yet, in those 6 weeks in 1940, none of that seemed possible. The world had seen a new kind of war of speed, shock, and skyward dominance. The Luftwaffe